segment 3, race and culture, economic facts and fallacies. A fallacy is that the current fatherless families so prevalent among contemporary blacks are a legacy of slavery, where families were not recognized under slavery. This ignores the fact that the problem has become much worse among generations of blacks far removed from slavery than among generations closer to the era of slavery, yes. Close quote. Explain that.
You mean explain why it is so, or
yes? See, why is that? Why? What on earth is going on there? That is so counter to what we assume.
Well, first of all, most people have not recognized the fact that if you go back into the 20s, you find that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks then than today. You find also, incidentally, that the blacks had as late as 1930, blacks had lower unemployment rates than whites. So all these things that we complain about and attribute to the era of slavery, those things should have been worse in the past than in the present.
Right.
But in fact, they're worse in the present than in the past. And I think if you want to look for a turning point, it would be since the 1960s.
And what happened in the 1960s?
Oh, you began to have not only the welfare state, you began to have the mindset that goes with the welfare state, so that there was no stigma any longer attached, for example, to being on relief or welfare.
And so, but why? Well, illegitimacy is exploding now among, it's high among Hispanics,
yes.
And it's exploding among whites. But the Moynihan report, when was that, Tom?
Oh, in the 60s. 64, 65.
When Moynihan talked about the illegitimacy rate among
yes.
blacks, which was exploding then. So what if the welfare state changes the way Americans think?
Yes.
Why did black Americans prove susceptible to that change first?
Because they were poor. I don't think that many Asian American girls who are preparing to go off to Stanford or Harvard are going to say, hey, I can live on welfare, why should I abstain?
So it's nothing to do with slavery, or at least it's less to do with slavery than it is
yes.
to do with what,
yes.
with the
yes.
government, with what we have willfully constructed since. Once again, crime. Once again, economic facts and fallacies. The history of crime and violence among blacks contradicts many widespread beliefs about the causes. Crime among black Americans, like crime among white Americans, was declining for years prior to the decade of the 1960s. But it was during the 1960s that crime rates began skyrocketing among both blacks and whites, and it was after the historic civil rights laws were passed that blacks began rioting in cities across the country.
Yes.
Again, this is just, well, actually, not only do you know it, but you relish, you relish how contrarian this is to everything we think we understand. What happens in the 1960s that leads to rioting?
For one thing, the justification of rioting, for one thing, and the holding back of the police. One of the biggest riots in terms of deaths occurred in Detroit. And the governor sent in troops, but he sent them with strict orders to hold off and so on. And once the rioters, who were just a small percentage of the population of the black community, once they saw that the police weren't going to do anything, they ran amok. I contrast that with Chicago, where I still remember the original Mayor Daley coming on television and saying, "I have instructed my police in case of riots to shoot to kill." There was horror across the country. People didn't notice that there were far fewer deaths in Chicago than there were in places where the mayor came on and pleaded with people to behave and said, "I understand your problems," and all of that kind of stuff, none of which stops riots.
Although Detroit, once again, economic facts and fallacies, although Detroit had the worst of the riots, the poverty rate among Detroit's black population was only half of that of blacks nationwide. Its home ownership rate among blacks was the highest in the country, and its unemployment rate was 3.4% lower than among whites nationwide. Detroit did not have a massive riot because it was an economic disaster area. It became an economic disaster area after the riots.
Yes.
So again, what causes these riots? Once they get started, the governor does the wrong thing.
Yes.
But what starts them?
Oh, anything can start a riot. The question is, how do you stop them? And James Q. Wilson once said, the only thing that will stop the riot is overwhelming force on the scene. But you see, if you put overwhelming force on the scene, that will indeed stop the riot cold. But then the next day, the newspapers will say, why did the police overreact? I mean, there was just a little disturbance, and here come these tons of cops.
Right, right. Here's once again, race and culture, economic facts and fallacies. Race is used as a sorting device for decision making, even by people who are not racists. Thus, employers may be reluctant to hire young black males because these employers are aware of what a high proportion of them have been arrested or imprisoned, even if the employers have no antipathy to black people as such and readily hire older blacks or black females, close quote. Are you saying that discrimination, even on the basis of race, you're saying it can be rational. Mm-hmm. Do you want to suggest that it can be acceptable?
Well, that's a different question.
Yes,
but I do notice that among a group of employers who routinely check everyone for prison records, the hiring of young black males is greater than in the employers in general. Whereas once they realize,
if they find somebody whose record is clean, they'll take him.
Yes.
Got it.